William is a heartbroken veteran, takes a journey to a secluded cabin gifted to him for just $5, hoping to escape the haunting memories of his lost family. But as he steps into the cabin, he's not alone. A powerful German shepherd, scarred from past battles, stands watch. The tension in the air thickens as the dog's gaze locks onto William. Who is she? What secret does she guard in this forgotten place? Join William and his unexpected companion in a journey of healing, loyalty, and fierce protection. What they discover inside will change everything. Watch the full story unfold. Subscribe, like, and share to support this emotional journey. The morning sun crept through the dusty blinds, casting long shadows across the empty room. William sat at the kitchen table, his hands steady, but his mind heavy with memories. 2 years had passed since the crash. 2 years since Emily and Rose had been torn from him in an instant. He had buried them, but the grief never left. It lingered in the corners of his quiet home, in the echoes of their laughter that could no longer be heard. He stared at the pile of unopened letters in front of him, a routine he had fallen into after their deaths. Bills, advertisements, nothing important, nothing worth his time. But this morning something was different. There, tucked between the pile of unopened mail, was an envelope that stood out. The paper was thick, aged, and the ink on the front was smeared slightly as if someone had written it in a hurry. No return address, just his name, William Cole, in neat handwriting. His curiosity piqued. William carefully opened the envelope, wondering what strange correspondence could be hidden inside. As he unfolded the paper, a single piece of legal parchment caught his eye. A deed, a cabin, in the Sierra Nevada, and the price? $5. He read the words again, his brow furrowing in disbelief. A mountain cabin owned by a man named Samuel Grant, whom William had never met, was now his, for $5. It seemed impossible. The letter offered no explanation, no reason for this strange gift, only the name of the previous owner and a brief note that read, "For you, William, you'll understand when you arrive." William sat back in his chair, the letter heavy in his hands. He stared at the words for what felt like an eternity, his mind racing. Was this a mistake, a prank? Who would give away property for such a price, especially in a place as remote as the Sierra Nevada? His skepticism surged, but something about the letter felt real. The legal seal, the handwriting, the strange sense of purpose that settled over him as he read it. Could it be a sign? A chance to escape the memories of his past? To leave the suffocating silence of his home behind? He thought of Emily and Rose, how they had filled the house with warmth and laughter. Now all he had were their memories and the silence that consumed him. With a deep sigh, William stood up and grabbed his coat from the hook. He didn't know what he was expecting, but he couldn't ignore the pull. Maybe it was time to leave the empty halls of his house and step into something unknown. Without a second thought, he folded the deed carefully and tucked it into his pocket. The weight of it felt heavier than just the paper. It felt like a call to action. As he made his way to the door, William glanced one last time at the empty house. The memories still clung to the walls, but now, for the first time in a long while, he felt a sense of urgency. Something was waiting for him. He stepped outside, the cool air biting at his skin, and locked the door behind him. The road ahead was uncertain, but for the first time in years, he didn't feel quite so alone. The sun had barely risen as William stood in front of the open suitcase, the weight of his decision settling heavily in the pit of his stomach. He wasn't sure what he was searching for. Maybe just a way to fill the emptiness that had haunted him for the past 2 years. His fingers hovered over the items he was packing. A jacket for the mountain chill, a few clothes, and a few essentials for the journey. But the one thing he hesitated on, the one thing he couldn't leave behind, was the small photograph tucked carefully inside his jacket. He stared at it for a long time, his eyes tracing the familiar faces of Emily and Rose. Their smiles were frozen in time, their laughter still echoing in his heart, though faintly. They had been his world, his purpose. Now all that remained was a shadow of the life they had shared, a life he could never get back. He slipped the photo into his bag, pressing it close to his chest for a moment before carefully zipping it shut. The act felt final, like he was putting away a part of himself he wasn't sure he was ready to let go of. But the road ahead was calling him, and he couldn't stay trapped in the silence anymore. The drive was long. The hours blurred as the landscape shifted from the familiar bustle of the city to the quiet stretch of highway leading into the mountains. The hum of the engine, the occasional chirp of a bird, and the wind rushing through the cracked window were the only sounds that accompanied him. The world outside seemed to grow quieter the further he drove, but inside his mind, the noise never stopped. He thought about the letter again, the strange deed that had come with no explanation. Samuel Grant. Who was he? Why had he left the cabin to William? The question gnawed at him, but he couldn't find the answers. With each mile, the weight of his own loneliness pressed harder against his chest. He tried to focus on the road, but memories of Emily and Rose kept flooding back. He remembered the sound of Rose's laughter as she ran through the yard, chasing after the butterflies that fluttered around her. He remembered the warmth of Emily's touch, the way she would squeeze his hand when words couldn't express what they both felt. As the road twisted and turned, climbing higher into the Sierra Nevada, the silence in the car felt suffocating. The mountains loomed ahead, their peaks jagged and imposing, as if they were guarding something he wasn't yet ready to face. But as he drove on, there was a quiet pull inside him, a quiet hope that maybe, just maybe, this cabin was the key to breaking free from the memories that chained him to the past. The scent of pine began to fill the air as he ventured deeper into the mountains. The landscape grew more rugged, the trees denser, and the roads more narrow. As the sun began to set, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple, William felt a strange sense of calm wash over him. The isolation of the mountains was both daunting and soothing. He was far from the world he had known, and for the first time in what felt like forever, he didn't feel the weight of his loss as sharply. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, the small cabin appeared before him. It was tucked between two towering pines, its weathered walls standing firm against the elements. The roof sagged slightly under the weight of years, and the windows reflected the fading light in a way that made the place feel alive with secrets. William's heart raced, but it wasn't fear that gripped him. It was something else, something he couldn't quite name. The road had led him here. This cabin, this strange, unexpected place, might just be the answer he had been searching for. But as he parked the car and stepped out into the cool evening air, he realized there was one question still unanswered. What exactly was waiting for him inside? The engine of William's truck sputtered softly as it came to a stop, the tires grinding against the gravel before sinking slightly into the earth. He took a deep breath, letting the mountain air fill his lungs. It was cool and crisp, the scent of pine and damp earth mixing together in a way that felt foreign yet strangely comforting. The silence was all-encompassing, a stark contrast to the noise of city life he had left behind. Here, in the mountains, it felt as if time had slowed, as if the world had paused and allowed him to catch up. William's eyes swept over the landscape before him. The dense trees stood like silent sentinels, their towering trunks casting long shadows across the rugged terrain. The road that led him here had been narrow and uneven, and now it seemed to vanish into the wilderness. There were no signs of civilization, no other houses, no lights in the distance, only the quiet expanse of nature. He stepped out of the truck, his boots crunching against the gravel, the sound piercing the stillness. His heart thudded in his chest as he walked toward the cabin. Each step felt deliberate, as though the mountain itself was watching, measuring his movements. The air was thick with the scent of earth and old wood, and as he approached the cabin, a strange feeling washed over him, a mix of anticipation and uncertainty. The cabin sat nestled between two towering pines, its weathered exterior worn by years of exposure to the harsh elements. The roof sagged slightly, and the windows, though intact, had the look of something long abandoned. The place seemed forgotten, as if it had been waiting for someone to come along and breathe life back into it. The walls, cracked and faded by time, seemed to whisper stories that had been left untold. William stood still for a moment, taking it all in. There was something eerie about the solitude, but also something strangely peaceful. This place, despite its decay, felt like it held the answers he had been searching for. It was as if the land itself was calling to him, offering him a chance to escape, to move beyond the weight of his past. He slowly walked around the cabin, his hand brushing against the rough wood of the porch railing. The old wood creaked under his touch, as if acknowledging his presence. A cool breeze stirred the leaves in the trees, but there was no other movement, no sound except for the distant call of a bird and the rustle of the leaves. William could almost feel the cabin's history pressing against him, like the weight of all the memories and stories that had been kept hidden within its walls. It was a place out of time, disconnected from the world he knew, and yet it somehow felt like the answer to his grief, his confusion, and the endless questions that had haunted him since the loss of Emily and Rose. He moved slowly up the steps and stopped at the door. His hand hovered over the worn knob for a moment before he turned it. The door creaked open, the sound breaking the silence with an eerie echo. Inside, the air was stale, filled with the scent of dust and old wood, but there was something else, something that tugged at his heart. William stepped inside, his eyes adjusting to the dim light that filtered through the cracked windows. The space was small, modest, but it held a strange charm. The walls were lined with faded wallpaper, and the furniture, though old, seemed sturdy. It was as if the cabin had been left in a hurry, frozen in time, waiting for someone to return. But as William stood there, the quietness of the place felt almost too heavy. He could feel his pulse quicken, the weight of the silence pressing down on him. What was it about this cabin, this strange gift from a man he had never met, that stirred something so deep within him? Before he could ponder further, a movement in the corner of his vision caught his attention. He froze, his heart pounding. Someone was watching him. The movement in the corner of his vision was subtle, but it was enough to stop William in his tracks. His heart skipped a beat as his eyes darted toward the doorway where a figure stood watching him from the shadows. It wasn't a person, but a dog, large, powerful, and with an intensity in its eyes that made William's pulse race. Marley, the German shepherd, stood in the threshold, her amber eyes locked onto William. She was still, her muscles taut like a coiled spring, as if every fiber of her being was waiting for him to make the next move. Her coat was dark along her back, fading into warm tan at the legs and chest. Vicious scars marked her flank, pale lines tracing her skin that spoke of battles survived. She was no stray, she belonged here, and she was ready to protect what was hers. For a moment, neither of them moved. The air in the cabin felt thick with anticipation. William's breath quickened, and a strange sensation washed over him. The silence of the cabin, the eerie stillness, seemed to grow heavier with the presence of the dog. Her gaze was steady, unwavering, as though she was measuring him, assessing whether he was a friend or an intruder. William felt an odd pang of recognition. He had seen that look before in the eyes of soldiers standing watch in hostile territories. It was the look of someone or something that had been through hell and was unwilling to let its guard down. The dog didn't approach, didn't wag her tail or give any indication of welcome. She simply stood there, blocking the doorway with an air of quiet authority. William hesitated, unsure of what to do. He had never been good with dogs, but something in Marley's stance, her silent challenge, made him feel both uneasy and oddly reassured. He knew she was no ordinary dog. She was more than just a guard dog. She was a protector, a soldier in her own right, holding the line against anyone who would dare trespass. "Easy, girl," William said softly, his voice low and steady, the same tone he used in war zones to calm civilians. He took a cautious step forward, but Marley didn't move. She didn't advance, nor did she retreat. Her eyes remained fixed on him, sharp and calculating, waiting for him to make the next move. William took another step, this time more slowly. He wasn't sure why, but there was something about her presence that commanded respect. Maybe it was the scars that told stories of pain and survival. Maybe it was the way she stood her ground without flinching. Whatever it was, he knew that Marley wasn't going to let him pass unless he earned it. The tension between them hung thick in the air, and for a moment William wondered if he was making a mistake coming here. But the strange pull that had led him to this cabin, to this moment, urged him on. He wasn't here to fight the dog. He was here for answers. Answers he couldn't find in the empty house he'd left behind. Finally, he stopped a few feet from her, squatting down to make himself less threatening. "I'm not here to take anything from you," he said quietly, his eyes softening as he spoke. He extended his hand slightly, palm open, showing her there was no threat. Marley's ears twitched at the sound of his voice, but her posture didn't change. She was still, unwavering, watching him with the same intensity. William could see the muscles in her legs twitching slightly, ready to spring into action if necessary, but she didn't. Instead, she let out a low growl, a warning that held both power and restraint. William remained calm, steady, his heart beating in his chest as he waited for her to make the next move. He couldn't help but feel a strange kinship with the dog. Both of them had experienced loss, both had faced battles they didn't choose, and both were guarding something they couldn't afford to lose. Slowly, with a single deliberate motion, Marley's stance softened. She didn't move away, but she relaxed, the tension in her body easing ever so slightly. It was as if she had decided he wasn't an enemy, at least not yet. William let out a breath he hadn't realized he was holding. The air between them was still thick with the unspoken, but for now, they had reached an unspoken understanding. He wasn't a threat. He was just another stranger in this forgotten place, seeking something he couldn't yet name. But there was something else there, something deeper. The dog wasn't just guarding the cabin. She was guarding more than that. She was guarding a piece of his own past, a piece of his own healing. "Thank you," William whispered, though he wasn't sure if she understood. But in that moment, he felt a strange connection to Marley. She was a soldier just like him. And in that silence, they both understood that duty didn't end with battle. It continued, even in the most unexpected places. With a final glance, Marley stepped aside, allowing him to enter. William felt the weight of her gaze on him as he stepped forward, the door creaking shut behind him. As the door creaked shut behind him, William's gaze swept over the cabin. It was simple, just the bare essentials. A small wooden table, a few chairs, and a stone fireplace that had long since been cold. Dust settled thick on the furniture, and the air held the stillness of a place long abandoned. He moved cautiously, letting the silence envelop him as he explored. But as his fingers brushed over the old furniture, his mind drifted and the stillness of the room faded away, replaced by the chaos of another time, another life. The smell of gunpowder, the sound of boots on gravel, the shrill crack of gunfire, it all came rushing back. William closed his eyes for a moment, the memories hitting him like a wave. He was no longer in the cabin, standing in the dust and silence. Instead, he was back in the heat of battle, his uniform tight around his chest, the weight of his weapon in his hand. He could hear his comrades shouting orders, the hum of the battlefield thick in the air. The memories were vivid. His time in the Marines had been more than just service. It had been his identity. It had been purpose. He had been someone who stood for something, someone who knew his role, someone who knew where he belonged. The war had given him direction, even if it had been a hard one. And when the war ended, that direction had been ripped away from him. "William!" A voice called out, sharp and urgent, snapping him from his thoughts. He turned, finding his friend Mick sprinting toward him. Mick's face was smeared with dirt, his uniform stained from the dust of the desert. His eyes were wide, frantic. "Get down!" he yelled, pulling William to the ground just as a bullet whizzed past them. William had barely registered the sound before Mick was dragging him back into cover. In that moment, the weight of what they were fighting for had never been clearer. The soldiers, the lives at stake, the camaraderie. They had all been a part of him. They were a brotherhood forged in fire. But then the world changed. The war ended. The missions stopped. And William was left standing in a world where the battle had ceased, but the scars remained. The transition from soldier to civilian was never easy. The certainty of purpose was gone. William opened his eyes now, back in the cabin. The quiet was overwhelming, suffocating even. In the field, he had known his place, his responsibility. But here, in this cabin, surrounded by silence, he wasn't sure who he was anymore. The cabin didn't just feel abandoned. It felt like a graveyard for memories. His memories. There was nothing here to anchor him. No mission, no comrades, no purpose, only Marley, the dog who had guarded this place for so long. He walked over to the window, looking out over the mountains. The distant peaks seemed so still, but they were full of secrets. Just like him. Just like the cabin. In the military, William had fought to protect others. Now he was fighting against himself, trying to find a new reason to move forward. The cabin, the letter, Marley. They all felt like pieces of a puzzle he wasn't sure he could solve. He wasn't just seeking answers about the cabin, he was seeking answers about himself. His hand tightened on the window ledge, and he sighed. The ache in his chest wasn't from the weight of the past, but from the fear of facing a future without purpose. The soldier inside him had fought on the front lines, but now he was fighting a battle of a different kind, one that didn't have clear lines or a way to win. As the last rays of daylight dipped below the horizon, William took one last look at the empty space around him. The stillness was unbearable, but the feeling in his chest, the nagging sense that there was more to this place than met the eye, made him realize one thing. Maybe, just maybe, this cabin held the answer he had been searching for all along. The night had settled in, the cabin now draped in darkness, save for the faint light filtering through the cracked windows. William stood still, his thoughts a tangled mess of uncertainty and curiosity. The silence of the cabin pressed in around him, heavier than before, as though the walls themselves were holding their breath, waiting for him to uncover what had been hidden for so long. He moved cautiously, his boots making faint echoes against the wooden floorboards. The room felt smaller now, the weight of his own questions expanding with each step. He couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to this place than the abandoned walls and the fading memories of its past. Something was waiting, something tied to the letter, to Samuel Grant, to the strange pull that had led him here. As he reached the far corner of the room, something caught his eye. A faint, uneven mark on the floor, as though the boards had been disturbed recently. His heart quickened. He crouched down, his fingers brushing against the edges of the floor. There, in the dim light, he noticed the faint outline of a trapdoor. His pulse raced as he realized that the cabin had a secret. It was more than just a forgotten relic. It was hiding something that had been deliberately concealed. With trembling hands, William pried at the edge of the floorboard, his nails catching on the rough wood. It took a few moments, but eventually the board lifted with a soft groan, revealing a hidden compartment beneath the floor. His heart pounded in his chest as he peered inside. There, lying in the darkness, was an old wooden chest, its surface scratched and scarred by time. It was small, but sturdy, bound with iron and sealed shut with a rusty lock. William's breath caught in his throat. This was no ordinary box. This was something important, something that had been hidden for a reason. With his heart pounding, he reached into his bag for the small knife he had brought with him. He worked the blade around the lock, the metal scraping against the wood, but it finally gave way with a soft click. He exhaled slowly, his hands shaking as he lifted the lid. Inside the chest were stacks of papers, yellowed with age, and a small bundle wrapped in cloth. William picked up the papers first, his fingers brushing over the neat handwriting on each page. They were maps of the land surrounding the cabin, sketches of the mountains, and measurements of the soil. His eyes scanned quickly, but it was the last document that caught his attention. It was a letter, neatly folded, its edges frayed with age. The handwriting was familiar, Samuel Grant's. William carefully unfolded it, his mind racing. William, if you are reading this, then I trust you to understand the weight of what I've left behind. The land you now stand on holds more than just memories. It holds secrets that must not be forgotten. This cabin was never just a retreat. It is a part of something much larger, something that people like Nicholas Hale will stop at nothing to uncover. But these lands, these mountains, they belong to those who have the strength to protect them. William's fingers trembled as he read the letter again. Nicholas Hale. The name sent a shiver down his spine. He had heard whispers about the man, a powerful figure who controlled industries, but he hadn't expected his name to surface here, in the middle of nowhere, tied to the fate of this cabin. The letter went on, detailing the mining operations in the Sierra Nevada and the valuable resources hidden beneath the land. You must protect this land, William. The evidence is hidden, buried beneath the surface, and the world needs to know what is happening here. This cabin, this place is not just a retreat, it is a fortress, and you, like the soldier you once were, must guard it. William's chest tightened as he absorbed the weight of Samuel Grant's words. The truth was darker than he had imagined, and the responsibility now lay in his hands. He wasn't just in this cabin for answers anymore. He was here for something much larger, something that could change everything. He closed the chest with a heavy heart, the full weight of his new mission settling over him. The answers had come, but they only raised more questions, and now he knew there was no turning back. The chest sat heavy on the floor in front of William, its contents spilling secrets that now weighed on him more than ever. His hand shook as he flipped through the pile of papers, each page revealing something darker than the last. Maps, diagrams, photographs, all linked to the same grim reality. The first map he pulled out was an intricate sketch of the Sierra Nevada. It was marked with bright red X's, all pointing to different locations in the mountains. At the top of each X was a note written in Grant's careful handwriting. Untapped mineral veins, rich deposits, protect these sites. The maps weren't just drawings, they were blueprints for a mining operation that stretched far and wide across the mountains. The next set of papers were detailed geological surveys, readings of the land, the soil, the rock beneath the earth. William could see the numbers, the measurements, all pointing to one thing. This land was a gold mine. Not just in the literal sense, but in the figurative one as well. Whoever controlled these resources controlled everything. And then there were the photographs. Black and white images of the land, the mountains, the rivers. They looked innocent enough at first glance, just scenic shots of a wild, untouched world. But as William studied them more closely, he saw the subtle clues. In one of the photos, a bulldozer was visible in the distance, cutting into the land, displacing dirt, leaving scars on the earth. In another, a group of men in dark suits stood in front of a rig, their faces obscured by shadows, but their postures exuding power. It was all starting to come together. William felt a knot form in his stomach as he flipped through more pages. There were letters, communications between Grant and a number of companies, some of them well known in the mining world. It was clear that Grant had discovered something that could change the course of the world, if people like Nicholas Hale didn't get their hands on it first. Grant's notes were filled with warnings. The land must be protected. The consequences of mining here will be catastrophic. He spoke of poisoning rivers, collapsing slopes, and land stripped bare, all in the name of greed. The more William read, the more the truth settled in. The cabin wasn't just some strange gift. It was the front line of a battle that had been raging long before he ever received that mysterious letter. Samuel Grant had been fighting to protect this land, but he had failed. And now, the weight of that failure had fallen onto William's shoulders. He had been right to come here. This cabin, this place, was more than just a retreat. It was the last stronghold. It was the final line of defense against those who would stop at nothing to take what wasn't theirs. William's hands clenched into fists as he thought of Nicholas Hale. He could already feel the man's shadow looming over him, the same way it had loomed over Grant. The stakes were higher than he had ever imagined, and now he realized the responsibility wasn't just to himself. It was to everyone who depended on the land's protection. William took a deep breath, trying to steady himself. There was no turning back. The truth had been laid bare, and now he had to act. The documents were not just a warning, they were the key to understanding what needed to be done. But as he set the papers down, another thought crossed his mind. If Hale was after these resources, William wasn't the only one interested in protecting the land. He had to be ready for what was coming. The night was quiet, but a feeling of unease lingered in the air. William sat at the small wooden table, the documents from the chest spread out in front of him. The truth, raw and heavy, weighed on his mind, but it wasn't just the information that troubled him now. It was the sense of something approaching, something he couldn't ignore. The mountain, with its steep ridges and endless pines, had once felt like a sanctuary, but now it felt like a battleground. A distant sound broke the silence, a faint engine noise, low and rumbling. William's heart skipped a beat. He stood up slowly, his eyes narrowing as he listened. The noise grew louder, closer. Someone was coming. His first instinct was to grab the rifle he had stored near the door. He reached for it, fingers trembling slightly, and then paused. It could be anyone, he thought, maybe some lost traveler or a ranger passing through. But deep down, he knew better. This wasn't a coincidence. He could feel the danger creeping closer. The low hum of the engine grew louder, cutting through the stillness. It was too deliberate to be a passing vehicle. It was a search. Someone was looking for something. Someone was looking for him. William glanced toward the door. Marley was already standing, her body tense, her ears pricked forward. She was always aware, always ready, the dog's amber eyes locked onto his as if she could sense the same threat he was feeling. She padded toward the door, not a sound from her as she moved, her movements fluid and purposeful. The German shepherd knew her role. She had been guarding this place long before William arrived, and she would continue to do so. "Easy, girl," William whispered softly. He didn't need to tell her what to do. Marley knew. She had sensed the threat long before he had. The sound of the engine was unmistakable now, a truck, heavy and powerful, moving along the dirt road toward the cabin. William stepped closer to the window, crouching down to get a better view without being seen. The truck crept through the trees, its headlights cutting through the darkness. William's grip tightened on the rifle, his pulse quickening. This was no ordinary visitor. This was the first sign of Nicholas Hale's men, and they were closing in. He glanced at Marley, who stood guard by the door, her posture unwavering. There was no fear in her, just the calm determination of a soldier preparing for battle. Her eyes were fixed on the entrance, as if waiting for the moment to strike. William's mind raced. He didn't know what they wanted, but he knew it couldn't be good. He had read enough in the documents to understand the value of what was buried in this land. And if Hale's men were here, it meant they were closing in on the very thing Samuel Grant had fought to protect. The truck came to a slow stop just outside the cabin. William felt his heartbeat thrum in his ears. The engine cut off, and for a moment there was nothing but the sound of the wind rustling the trees. Then the door to the truck opened with a creak, and a figure stepped out, tall and broad-shouldered. William's hand instinctively reached for the door handle, his knuckles white. The tension in the air was palpable. Marley was ready. So was he. He had no choice now but to face whatever was coming. The sound of footsteps echoed on the wooden porch as the figure moved closer to the door. William's breath caught in his throat. This was it. The first intruder had arrived. The sound of the footsteps grew louder, each step a reminder that this was no longer just a quiet retreat. William's heart hammered in his chest as he gripped the rifle, the cold metal biting into his palms. The door creaked softly under the weight of someone's approach, and for a moment the world outside seemed to hold its breath. Marley's muscles tensed and she shifted her weight, the only sign of her readiness. William could feel her energy, the same focus and drive that had been ingrained in him during his years as a Marine. She wasn't just guarding the cabin, she was guarding him. The figure outside moved closer, the air thick with anticipation. William's instincts screamed at him to be ready. He could feel the presence of the intruder before he even saw him. A dangerous man with intentions as cold and calculated as his steps. The figure finally appeared at the threshold, and William's eyes narrowed, locking onto the man who had stepped onto his porch. The tall, broad-shouldered man wore a dark coat, his features sharp, and his expression unreadable. His eyes swept the cabin quickly, but he didn't enter. Instead, he remained just outside, waiting. "Who are you?" William called out, his voice steady but carrying the weight of authority. His rifle was aimed low, not at the intruder, but just enough to signal he wasn't here to talk. The man didn't flinch, his gaze flickering to William's face before drifting to the German shepherd standing beside him. "I could ask you the same thing," the man said, his voice smooth, almost too calm for the situation. "I'm just here to take a look around. You don't mind, do you?" William's grip on the rifle tightened, but he forced himself to remain still. He could feel the tension in the air, thick and electric, and he knew that any wrong move could turn this moment into something far worse. "This place isn't for tourists," William replied, his voice low and controlled. "So unless you have a reason to be here, I'd suggest you leave." The man smiled, a thin, cold smile that didn't reach his eyes. "I have every right to be here. You're just in the way." With that, the man stepped forward, moving to push the door open. Marley growled low, her eyes locked on the intruder, her stance firm. The hair on the back of William's neck stood up. He could feel the line between peace and violence quickly blurring. Before the man could touch the door, William took a step forward, blocking his path. "I don't think you understand," William said, his voice cold. "This is my place now. You're not welcome here." The intruder's gaze flickered, then settled on William with a dangerous intensity. The smile faded from his face, replaced by something far darker. He wasn't here for a conversation, he was here to claim what didn't belong to him. "Move aside, soldier," the man said, his voice turning sharp, cold with authority. "I have orders." William's pulse raced. This wasn't just an intruder. This was someone with a purpose. And William had no idea how deep this went, but he knew one thing: he couldn't let them take anything from here. "I'm not moving," William said firmly, raising his rifle slightly. "Not for you, not for anyone." The tension between them thickened, palpable, like a drawn bowstring about to snap. The man didn't move, but his eyes flicked to Marley, then back to William, sizing him up. William took a breath, preparing himself for the confrontation that was coming. The dog was on alert, her growl growing louder as the distance between them closed. The man had made his move, and now it was William's turn. Without warning, the man lunged, his hand shooting out toward the door handle. In the same instant, Marley sprang forward, her teeth bared, her body a blur of muscle and fury. William moved to the side, quickly raising the rifle and aiming it at the ground in front of the man to show he wasn't playing games. "Back off," William warned. But the intruder wasn't intimidated. Instead, he stepped back, his hand now on the holster at his side. "You'll regret this," the man growled, his face hardening. "You don't know who you're messing with." William could feel his heart pounding in his chest, but there was no turning back now. The stakes were higher than he could have imagined, and every decision from here on out would determine how this would end. "Get off my property," William said, his voice steady, but filled with the weight of a man who had fought for much less. "And take your orders with you." The man's eyes flickered with something dark. Rage or surprise, William couldn't tell. He didn't wait for another word. With a sharp motion, the man turned and stormed off the porch, disappearing into the dark woods beyond. William didn't lower his rifle, watching every movement until the man was out of sight. Only then did he turn to Marley, who had relaxed but still stood with her head held high, eyes scanning the night. William's breath finally came out in a long exhale. His mind was racing. Nicholas Hale's men had found him. The game had begun. The night air was thick with the weight of uncertainty. William stood at the door of the cabin, the rifle still in his hands, eyes scanning the darkened forest beyond. He could hear nothing but the occasional rustle of leaves and the distant hoot of an owl. But the encounter with Nicholas Hale's man had made it clear. Things were no longer simple. The calm he had briefly felt was gone, replaced by an urgent sense of purpose. Marley stood beside him, her head low, but her senses sharp. As if she, too, could feel the growing tension, her amber eyes flicked back and forth, still alert, still on guard. William knew the night wasn't over yet. He turned back to the cabin, determined to uncover more of the truth hidden within these walls. He walked to the small desk in the corner of the cabin where he had placed the chest earlier. The documents inside it had already revealed a great deal, maps, notes, and warnings from Samuel Grant. But something told him there was more to discover. There had to be. He couldn't shake the feeling that Grant had left behind something crucial, something that would make everything make sense. William opened the chest once again, sifting through the papers with a renewed urgency. His hands were steady, but his mind raced as he flipped through more maps and letters, each one pointing to something darker than the last. Finally, he pulled out a thick file, its edges yellowed with age. As he opened it, a series of photographs spilled out onto the floor. They were of the mountains, close-ups of the terrain, of the rivers and the dense forests. But these were no ordinary pictures. They showed equipment, machinery, and workers. Men in suits standing next to bulldozers, drilling rigs mounted on the ground, and piles of dirt being moved from place to place. The photographs depicted what appeared to be early stages of a mining operation, a large-scale one at that. But what struck William was the sense of urgency in the way the images were arranged. There was something hidden here, and it wasn't just about mining gold. Flipping through the file, he found more documents, detailed reports of mineral deposits and surveys showing vast veins of valuable resources buried deep beneath the land. But what caught his eye was the last sheet in the file. It was a letter, written in a hurried scrawl, almost as if the writer had been racing against time. They won't stop. They think they can buy the land, the rights to the resources buried beneath it, but they don't know what's really here. The consequences of what they're planning could destroy everything. I've tried to warn them, but greed has clouded their vision. They are too blind to see what will happen if they proceed. William felt a cold shiver run down his spine as he read the words. This was it. This was the reason Samuel Grant had fought so hard to protect this land. The mining operation wasn't just illegal, it was catastrophic. If Nicholas Hale and his men succeeded, they would devastate the entire ecosystem, poisoning rivers, destroying habitats, and leaving nothing but a barren wasteland in their wake. The weight of the responsibility hit William harder than he had expected. This wasn't just about protecting the cabin or its land. This was about stopping something much larger. The stakes had been raised, and it was no longer just a fight for survival. It was a fight to prevent an environmental disaster. And William knew deep down that this was his battle now. He could no longer just sit back and watch. He had to stop them. He had to stop Hale's men before they could destroy everything Grant had tried to protect. The land was his to guard now. And if that meant facing off against men like Hale, then so be it. William closed the file and returned it to the chest. His fingers lingered on the edges of the worn papers, his thoughts racing. He was no longer just a man running from his past. He was a soldier once more, fighting not for glory or honor, but for something far more important. As he stood in the cabin, the weight of the documents in his hands, he knew one thing. The battle had only just begun. The quiet had been shattered, and soon there would be no turning back. The night air hung heavy around the cabin as William stood at the window, his rifle in hand, watching the dark outline of the trees stretching across the mountainside. The world beyond was still, yet he knew that the calm was fleeting. The documents from Samuel Grant, the hidden files, and the dark truth they contained, they were about to cost him everything. A distant engine noise reached his ears, followed by the sound of tires crunching on gravel. William's grip on the rifle tightened. They were here. Marley's low growl broke the silence. She stood beside him, her body tense, her amber eyes fixed on the darkness outside, listening for any movement. William glanced down at her, and for a moment their shared understanding passed between them. There was no turning back. They were about to face whatever Hale's men were bringing. The engine sound grew louder, and soon headlights cut through the trees, illuminating the dirt road leading up to the cabin. William took a steadying breath, feeling the familiar adrenaline surge through his veins. He was no stranger to danger, but this was different. This wasn't just a fight for survival. This was a fight to protect the land, the last defense against men like Nicholas Hale. The truck's headlights were now shining directly into the cabin, casting eerie shadows on the walls. William stepped back, his heart pounding as he watched the figures disembark. He didn't need to wait any longer to know they were here to take what was his and what was Samuel Grant's. With a swift motion, William moved to the door, securing it as quietly as possible, his mind focused on the task ahead. Marley stood beside him, her body alert, her growls growing louder as she sensed the approaching threat. A loud bang on the door made his heart skip a beat. The knock came again, harder this time, followed by a voice, cold and commanding. "Open up! We know you're in there!" The voice was unmistakable. Nicholas Hale's men had arrived. William's fingers curled tighter around the rifle, his mind racing. There was no talking his way out of this. This was it. The fight was coming to him. Without hesitation, he moved to the window, peering through the curtains just enough to see what was happening. 3 men had gathered by the porch, their rifles slung over their shoulders. They were methodical, moving in coordinated silence. Trained, disciplined. They weren't here for a simple conversation. Another loud bang at the door made the decision for him. William turned to Marley. Her stance had shifted. She was ready. "Stay close, girl," he murmured, his voice steady despite the tension in his chest. With a deep breath, he swung open the door and immediately took cover behind a nearby table, raising his rifle in one smooth motion. "Move in!" he heard one of the men shout as they pushed forward, charging toward the cabin. The first shot rang out, tearing through the air, narrowly missing William as it hit the wood beside him. He returned fire instantly, the crack of his rifle echoing through the cabin. Marley was at his side, her body a blur of muscle as she launched herself at the men, her jaws snapping with terrifying precision. The first man she reached let out a shout of pain as Marley's teeth sank into his arm, dragging him to the ground. William could hear the chaos escalating, the sounds of gunfire blending with the cries of men struggling against Marley's relentless assault. William's heart was pounding in his chest, but there was no hesitation in his movements. He fired again, hitting one of the attackers in the leg. The man fell, cursing, but his comrades didn't falter. They kept pushing forward, relentless in their mission. Marley's growls filled the cabin, sharp and angry, as she fought off the men with an unmatched ferocity. She was more than just a guard dog. She was a warrior, a protector, and together they made a formidable team. William's mind raced as the fight escalated. He couldn't keep them at bay forever. His hands were shaking, but his resolve was unshakable. The stakes were too high. He had to hold the line. He couldn't let them take what Samuel Grant had entrusted him with. More shots were fired, each one coming closer. William's thoughts flashed back to the documents, Grant's notes, his warnings. He had to protect them. There was no choice. Marley had dispatched another man, but she wasn't done yet. Her body was battered, but her determination never wavered. She stood firm, ready for the next threat. William's breath came in short bursts. The battle wasn't over yet, but he wasn't backing down. He would fight and he would protect what was left. The cabin was alive with chaos. The sounds of gunfire rang in William's ears, each shot a reminder that the stakes were higher than ever. His pulse was hammering in his chest, his breath coming in sharp, uneven bursts as he moved from cover to cover, trying to keep the attackers at bay. Every time he fired, every time he reloaded, it felt like they were pushing harder, determined to break through. Marley was relentless, tearing into the men who dared to come too close, but William could see the toll the fight was taking on her. Her fur was matted with dirt and blood. Her breath labored as she fought to protect him. She was strong, a warrior in her own right, but even the toughest of soldiers had their limits. William's mind raced as he ducked behind the table, catching a brief moment of respite. He knew that if he didn't act soon, they would lose everything. The documents, Samuel Grant's legacy, the evidence, it would all be taken from them. The thought of it sent a wave of panic through him. I can't let that happen, he thought. I won't. His fingers were slick with sweat as he tightened his grip on the rifle. He peered through the window, his eyes scanning the porch where more men had gathered, moving with purpose. They were no longer playing games. Nicholas Hale had sent them here to finish what they had started, and they were coming with everything they had. The truck parked outside wasn't just for show. Hale was serious, and William knew he had to make a choice: stay and fight or run and hope for the best. But there was no running now. He had no more options. The fight had come to him, and he couldn't walk away. With his heart pounding in his chest, William took another deep breath. The men outside were moving in closer, pushing toward the door. He could hear their voices now, shouting orders, calling for backup. Nicholas was coordinating them, and William realized with a cold certainty that the man wasn't going to stop until he had control of the cabin and everything within it. Marley's growls broke through the noise, her body low to the ground, ready to spring at the next attacker. She was tired, but she wasn't backing down. She never would. And neither would William. The door splintered with the force of a blow. William's instincts kicked in. He fired again, narrowly missing one of the men, but it was enough to send them scattering. He could hear their footsteps retreating, but it was only temporary. They were regrouping, preparing for another wave. William knew that this couldn't go on much longer. He glanced at Marley, her chest heaving with exhaustion, her eyes wild with determination. He reached down to her, his voice a low whisper. "We have to hold them off just a little longer." The door burst open again, and William dove for cover, taking the rifle with him. Another wave of gunfire erupted, and he squeezed the trigger, sending one of the men stumbling back, his rifle clattering to the floor. But there were more of them, more than William had anticipated. The tension in his chest tightened as he realized just how close they were to breaking through. The fire was getting hotter, the smoke choking him. Time was running out. In the chaos, William felt a brief moment of clarity. He had to act, now. He couldn't afford to wait any longer. If he didn't act quickly, they would lose everything. With no more time to waste, he made his decision. He grabbed the bundle of documents, his fingers trembling as he stuffed them into his jacket, his mind racing. He couldn't let them destroy everything Samuel Grant had worked for. Not now, not ever. Marley gave a final bark. Her body tensed as she prepared to strike once more. William looked at her, his heart swelling with gratitude. She was more than just a dog. She was his partner, his protector, his only ally in this fight. With the documents secured, he moved toward the back of the cabin, where the escape route was hidden. He wasn't sure how much longer they could hold out, but he knew that if he didn't leave now, they'd both be trapped. He had no time to waste. The clock was ticking, and the battle wasn't over yet. But one thing was certain: William wasn't going down without a fight. William's heart raced as he moved quickly toward the back of the cabin, the weight of the documents pressing against his chest. The sound of the gunfire and the shouts from outside were like a distant echo in his mind, overshadowed by the memories that had begun to flood in with every step he took. As he ducked low, glancing toward Marley, who remained at his side, snarling at the door as if daring the men to come closer, he couldn't help but think of Emily and Rose. Their faces flashed in his mind as clear as the moment they had left him. Emily's laughter. It used to fill the house, echoing through the halls like the sweetest melody. Rose's smile, that radiant, joyful smile, chasing the sunlight through the living room. He could still hear her voice, asking him to come outside and play, her tiny hands grasping his with innocent trust. But now, all that remained was the silence. In the middle of the chaos, amidst the gunfire, he felt a sudden pang in his chest. It was a sharp reminder of what he had lost, what he would never get back. The grief hit him hard, but with it came something stronger, an overwhelming sense of duty. He couldn't just stand by and let everything they had fought for be torn apart. "I can't let this happen," he whispered to himself, his voice trembling. The sound of Marley's growl pulled him back to the present. He looked down at her, her fur matted with dirt and blood, but her eyes still sharp, still full of that same fierce determination that had never left her. She was a warrior, just like him. The memories of his family stung, but they also fueled his resolve. He couldn't let them be erased. He couldn't let all the love, all the sacrifices be wiped away by the greed of men like Nicholas Hale. This land, these memories, they were his now to protect, just as Marley had been protecting it all these years. William reached the back door, his hand shaking slightly as he moved to unlatch it. The weight of the rifle was heavy, but in that moment it felt like a necessary burden. His mission was no longer just about survival. It was about preserving something greater than himself. Emily and Rose wouldn't want this to be the end, he thought. They wouldn't want him to give up. They would want him to fight just as he had when he was on the front lines, just as they had fought for him when they were alive. They had given him a reason to live, and now he would do everything in his power to honor them. As he stepped out into the darkened woods, the cold night air stinging his face, William's thoughts were a blur of action and emotion. Marley trotted beside him, her eyes constantly scanning the woods for any sign of danger. The ground beneath their feet was uneven, the terrain more difficult than he had expected, but he kept moving forward, driven by the weight of his mission. Every footstep was a reminder that time was running out. He had no idea how long he could hold out before Hale's men found him again, but he knew one thing for certain: he couldn't stop now. The past, the memories of his family would never leave him, but it was time to make sure that their legacy wasn't erased. Marley's low growl interrupted his thoughts, and he tensed, ready for whatever was coming next. The cold air bit at William's skin as he trudged through the dense underbrush, the weight of the document still heavy in his jacket. His mind raced with thoughts of what might come next, of how long he could keep running, of how far Nicholas Hale's men might push him. He didn't know how long he could hold out, but his every step felt like a battle against time. Marley's steady presence beside him was the only constant in the storm of his thoughts. Her low growls and vigilant eyes scanning the surrounding woods reminded him that he wasn't entirely alone. Even in the most uncertain of times, he had a companion who understood him in a way no one else could. For the first time in what felt like ages, a sense of relief washed over him. He wasn't just running anymore, he was fighting for something. For Emily, for Rose, for everything they had built and lost. But deep down, he knew that no matter how far he ran, no matter how many battles he fought alone, this wasn't a fight he could win by himself. Suddenly, the crackle of radio static broke through the silence of the night, sharp and jarring. William's heart skipped a beat, and for a moment he stood frozen, trying to make sense of the sound. Then he heard a voice, clear and firm, cutting through the static. "William Cole, this is Special Agent Isabella Reeves with the FBI. Do you copy?" William's breath caught in his throat. His head snapped toward the direction of the voice. He wasn't imagining it. Help was coming. "Agent Reeves?" William's voice cracked slightly as he answered. He could hardly believe the words that were coming out of his mouth. "I read you. I need help. They're closing in on me." "Hold tight, we're on our way," she replied, her voice steady and unwavering. "We have eyes in the sky. Stay on the move, William. We'll rendezvous at your location." For the first time in what felt like weeks, the weight on his chest began to lift, if only slightly. He wasn't fighting alone anymore. The realization that help was on the way filled him with a mixture of relief and urgency. But as quickly as the feeling of relief came, he was reminded of the reality of his situation. The fight was far from over. The men sent by Nicholas Hale were relentless, and they wouldn't stop until they had what they came for. William exchanged a quick glance with Marley, who was still on high alert, her ears pricked and her eyes darting around the dense woods. She knew something was coming, something that might be their only chance at survival. But William knew that he couldn't let his guard down, not yet. "We need to move," he whispered, more to himself than to Marley. But the dog seemed to understand, her body tensing as she prepared to continue their trek. With each step, the urgency in William's chest grew. The moment the agents arrived, they would have to move quickly. He couldn't afford to waste time. There was too much at stake. As they pressed forward through the trees, William's mind wandered back to the documents. The knowledge of the environmental catastrophe that would unfold if Hale's men succeeded made his stomach churn. He couldn't just let it happen, not on his watch. The path ahead was unclear, but the sense of relief he felt from hearing Agent Reeves's voice kept him moving forward. He wasn't alone in this fight anymore. Help was on the way, and together they would stop Nicholas Hale from destroying everything Samuel Grant had worked to protect. But just as William thought he might catch his breath, a new sound reached his ears, distant but unmistakable. The rumble of engines. And they were getting closer. The rumble of engines grew louder, crashing through the stillness of the forest like an impending storm. William's heart pounded in his chest as he glanced over at Marley, whose body was now taut with a heightened awareness. The sound of the engines was followed by the unmistakable crackle of flames, sharp, invasive, and impossible to ignore. "Shit," William muttered under his breath. He pushed forward, urgency fueling his every step. The realization hit him like a gut punch. Nicholas Hale's men weren't just here to intimidate him, they were here to burn everything down. He picked up his pace, the cold night air stinging his face as the fire began to roar in the distance. It wasn't just gunfire or the sound of boots on gravel anymore, it was fire, savage and indiscriminate, consuming everything in its path. Marley, sensing the danger, moved ahead of him, her body low to the ground, her fur bristling with the same fight-or-flight instinct that had kept her alive all these years. She was the first to spot the orange glow flickering between the trees, and her growl was a warning. Something was coming for them, something they couldn't outrun. "We have to get back," William breathed, the words falling from his lips as he scanned the woods, trying to make sense of the flames creeping toward them. The fire was fast, much faster than he had anticipated, and it was closing in with every passing second. The distant crackling of flames grew louder, mixing with the screech of burning trees. He could feel the heat even from where he stood, and the smoke was starting to fill the air, choking him, making it harder to breathe. He swallowed hard, trying to focus, trying to think clearly. He had to make a choice. William turned to Marley, whose gaze was locked onto the cabin in the distance, her body trembling with restrained energy. "Come on, girl," he murmured. He knew they had to move, they had to protect what was left. But as they started running back toward the cabin, William's mind raced. The documents, the evidence. It was all still inside, hidden in the chest, buried beneath the floor. If he didn't get back to it, everything Samuel Grant had fought for would be lost. Another crackling burst of flame sent a shiver down his spine. The fire was getting closer. "Stay with me, Marley," he commanded through gritted teeth. The urgency in his voice matched the pounding of his heart. He wasn't just running toward the cabin to escape, he was running to save everything that still mattered. The documents, the legacy of Samuel Grant had to survive. They pushed forward, the heat of the fire scorching their backs. William knew he couldn't leave the cabin behind, not now. His mind flickered to the image of Emily and Rose. What would they have wanted? Would they have wanted him to fight for what remained? Or would they have told him to walk away and save himself? But there was no time to question it. There was no choice to be made between family and duty. It wasn't about either. It was about everything. As they neared the cabin, the flames were just beginning to lick the edges of the porch, and the smoke was thick, swirling in the air like a living thing. William's throat burned as he drew in a breath, the taste of ash sharp in his mouth. He could see the silhouette of the cabin ahead, the flames already creeping around the edges, eating away at the foundation. He reached the door and forced it open, his heart thudding violently in his chest. The smell of smoke and burning wood filled his nose as he grabbed the chest. His hands were shaking, his breath ragged from running and the smoke choking his lungs. He looked up, only to see the fire had begun to engulf the porch. There was no time. He grabbed the documents and tucked them into his jacket with desperate urgency. "Hey, come on, Marley!" Marley, he urged. The dog, always loyal, stood by his side, her gaze still alert, her body tense as if she knew the gravity of the situation. In that split second, the flames broke through the door frame and the heat became unbearable. William turned, grabbing Marley by the collar, urging her to move, but just as they made it to the door, a burst of fire broke through, blocking their exit. They were trapped. The heat from the flames slammed into William like a wall. His face flushed from the intensity of the fire as the smoke swirled around him, suffocating, blurring his vision. He could feel the heat on his skin, the cabin groaning as the fire took hold. "Not now," William muttered to himself, his voice strained and hoarse. He grabbed Marley by the collar again, pulling her closer to him as they both moved away from the flames that were rapidly spreading. There was nowhere to go. The fire had already consumed the porch, and the windows were glowing like molten glass, threatening to shatter any second. William turned back toward the room. The chest was secured tightly in his hands, but the fire had surrounded them so quickly that it was now difficult to see the exit. His chest tightened, panic rising within him. He had to get out. He had to save the documents. This was more than just survival now. This was about protecting the last remnants of truth, the final proof of Samuel Grant's fight. "Come on," William urged, pulling Marley with him toward the back door. The smoke was thick and suffocating. His eyes watered as he squinted through the haze, trying to find a way out. The flames roared behind them, cutting off any escape from the front. They were trapped inside. And the fire wasn't the only thing closing in on them. The sound of boots crunching on gravel outside was unmistakable. Hale's men were closing in, and if they hadn't already set the fire, they were going to try and finish what they had started. The documents, the evidence. It all came down to this moment. The fire crackled behind him, closing in on the room. With every passing second, the walls seemed to close in tighter. The flames crept closer to his feet, licking at the edges of his boots. His breath was coming in ragged gasps, his lungs already heavy with the smoke. This couldn't be it, he thought. He couldn't let it end this way. He couldn't let everything they had worked for go up in flames. He glanced out the back door, seeing a gap between the trees, the clearing just beyond. But the fire was spreading fast, consuming the trees and the forest in its wake. There was no time. He couldn't afford to wait. Marley growled low in her throat, her ears flattened against her head, her body poised, ready for the next move. William could feel the familiar surge of adrenaline. He had been through this kind of chaos before, on the battlefield, in the thick of battle, but never like this, not with so much at stake. He turned to the window, and for a fleeting moment he saw a figure in the distance, approaching the cabin through the smoke and flames, one of Hale's men moving swiftly, closing in on them. William's heart skipped. He had to make a choice. The fire was too hot to stay in. The documents were too important to leave behind. The enemy was at the door. Without thinking, William grabbed Marley and pushed through the back door, stumbling into the smoky night. The flames erupted around him, the heat unbearable, but they had no choice. The only option was to push through. The night was full of chaos. The sound of cracking trees, the roar of fire, the distant footsteps of Hale's men. They were closing in. But William couldn't stop. His only thought was to survive, to protect the truth, and to keep moving before the fire consumed everything. The clearing was only a few yards ahead, but the fire had spread so rapidly that it was impossible to tell if they would make it. The flames were alive, a storm of heat and destruction that threatened to consume everything in its path. With every step, the fire grew louder, angrier. It wasn't just the physical heat that was closing in on him now, it was the threat of losing everything. William's resolve hardened. He wasn't going to lose. Not this time. The night was a blur of smoke and fire, the world around William consumed by the roar of flames. He stumbled through the clearing, heart pounding, pulling Marley along with him as they fought against the burning winds that whipped around them. The heat pressed against his back like a physical weight, and the air was thick with the scent of burning pine and earth. But the moment of fleeting hope when he thought they might escape evaporated as quickly as the smoke swirling around them. In the distance, the crackling of the fire was drowned out by the unmistakable sound of heavy boots pounding against the ground. Hale's men were coming, moving swiftly through the smoke, circling them like wolves, trapping them between the inferno and the cabin. William's breath caught in his throat. They were trapped. The fire had cut off their escape, and now the men were closing in from all sides. Every instinct in his body screamed at him to run, but there was nowhere to go. His only option was to fight. He couldn't let them get to the cabin, not with the documents inside. He couldn't let everything Samuel Grant had fought for be reduced to ashes. Marley growled low beside him, her body tense, every muscle ready to spring into action. She was as determined as he was, and that gave him the strength he needed to keep going. But the reality of their situation was sinking in with every passing second. The fire was raging around them, the heat nearly unbearable, and the men were closing in. William turned to face the incoming threat, his rifle held steady in his hands. He could feel his pulse thrumming in his ears, each beat a reminder of the urgency pressing down on him. The flames crackled louder, the wind pushing the fire toward them. But it wasn't just the fire that posed a threat anymore. The men, armed and ready, were coming for him. They would stop at nothing to destroy everything. "They're not getting it," William muttered to himself. His voice was steady, but the weight of his words was enough to ignite a fire of his own. This wasn't just about survival anymore. This was about protecting everything Samuel Grant had stood for. This was about holding the line. He looked around desperately. The fire had cornered them against the trees, the heat forcing him to sweat under his jacket. The men were getting closer, and there was no way to outrun them. They were too close. He had no choice but to make his stand here. Marley's growl grew louder as the first of Hale's men stepped into the clearing, their weapons raised, eyes scanning the smoke for their target. William didn't hesitate. He raised his rifle and fired. The shot rang out, the man stumbling back, cursing under his breath. But there was no time to savor the moment. More men were approaching, and the fire was inching closer with every second. William ducked behind a tree, trying to keep his movements quick and decisive, but there was no escaping this fight. The men were smart. They spread out, attempting to flank him, but Marley stayed close, her body poised to attack at any sign of danger. She was more than just a dog. She was his partner, and together they made an unbreakable team. With a sudden burst of adrenaline, William moved, charging toward the nearest attacker. The rifle was knocked from his hands in the struggle, but his fists were strong and steady. He tackled the man to the ground, swinging with all his might, his mind focused solely on protecting what was left. Another shot rang out, this one barely missing him. He spun around just in time to see the second wave of men advancing, their rifles aimed at him. The fire was now closing in on all sides, and there was no way to tell if they would make it out alive. William's chest tightened, but he didn't flinch. The decision was clear. He couldn't let them win. He couldn't let them take everything that had been entrusted to him. "Not tonight," William growled under his breath, pushing himself back up. He grabbed the fallen rifle and fired again, the sound of the shot drowned out by the firestorm raging around them. This was it, the last stand. The chaos around William was deafening. The roar of the fire, the crack of gunfire, and the shouts of Hale's men created a storm of noise that threatened to overwhelm him. Marley's growls filled the air as she charged at the next threat, her fierce loyalty unyielding. William's heart raced. His thoughts focused only on surviving this fight. He couldn't afford to let the fire consume them, nor could he let Hale's men take the documents, the truth that Samuel Grant had protected for so long. With every movement, his mind stayed sharp, aware of every sound, every step. But something kept tugging at the edge of his consciousness, like a whisper that refused to fade. The documents, the files he had just secured in his jacket, they were important. But there was something more to this cabin, something hidden. In a rare moment of stillness amidst the chaos, William paused. His mind flickered back to the chest he had found earlier, the chest that had contained more than just maps and letters. His gut told him that there was something else here, buried beneath the surface, waiting to be uncovered. "Marley!" William called softly, motioning for her to stay close. The dog, bloodied but still full of fire, moved beside him as he made his way toward the back of the cabin. The fire roared around them, but it wasn't the flames that held his attention now. It was the ground beneath his feet. The heat of the fire grew unbearable, but William focused on the earth in front of him. His hands trembled slightly as he knelt, running his fingers over the dirt and cracked wooden floor. Something was off. His instincts told him there was more beneath the surface. He pushed aside the debris, his fingers scraping against the rough wood and soil beneath. His breath quickened as he uncovered something, a hatch, a hidden door. The sensation of déjà vu swept over him as he realized that this wasn't just a cabin, it was a carefully constructed vault, a last line of defense. His pulse surged as he cleared the remaining dirt and debris. With one swift motion, he pried the hatch open. The air was thick and stagnant, but underneath the cabin's floor there was a space, hidden and untouched for years. William's heart pounded as he peered inside, seeing a wooden crate nestled within the dirt. His hand shook as he pulled it out. Inside the crate lay a trove of documents, photographs, and several well-preserved metal containers, their contents sealed and unknown. William's breath caught as he opened the first metal container. It was filled with photographs, clearer, more detailed than the ones he had seen earlier. But there was something different about these photos. These were not of the land or the mountains. They were of people, men in suits, talking in dark rooms, signing papers, shaking hands in shadowed corners. His eyes widened as he recognized one of the men in the photos, Nicholas Hale. There, in black and white, was the man he had been running from, a younger version of him standing with Grant in front of a map of the Sierra Nevada. William's stomach twisted. This wasn't just about mining. These photos revealed something far darker, a conspiracy, a coordinated effort to seize control of the land and the resources for profit, no matter the cost. But what struck him hardest was the final photograph. Samuel Grant, standing alone in a cabin holding a sealed envelope with a note scrawled across it. "If they find this, they will destroy everything. Do not let them win. The land is worth more than the gold beneath it." William's heart thudded painfully in his chest as he understood the magnitude of what he was holding. The land, the evidence. It wasn't just about preserving a place. It was about preserving a legacy, a promise Samuel Grant had made to protect something far more valuable than gold. His hands hovered over the documents, and he felt the weight of his decision. Should he reveal all of this to the world, expose the conspiracy, and risk everything, his life, his safety, or should he protect the secret, bury it, and let it die with him? As the fire crackled closer, William felt the truth pressing in on him. Nicholas Hale would stop at nothing to get these files. To expose this truth would mean bringing everything to light. But at what cost? He couldn't make this decision lightly. And the clock was ticking. The flames outside raged like a beast let loose, consuming the woods and the cabin with ferocity, but William's focus was sharp, his hands steady. He had the truth in his hands now, the weight of the files pressing down on him like an anchor. There was no turning back, not now. But what was the right choice? What was the price of justice? His thoughts were interrupted by the sudden crackle of radio static. His heart skipped, and he pulled the radio from his pack, gripping it with urgency. "William," the voice came through, steady and firm. "This is Special Agent Isabella Reeves. We've got eyes on you. We're en route." Relief flooded through him. Help was here. But the fight wasn't over yet. The fire wasn't just about survival anymore. It was about stopping Nicholas Hale and his men. The last of the files, those documents, the photographs, everything Samuel Grant had fought for now had to be protected. Outside, the fire raged, but William knew the truth had to be preserved, no matter the cost. The sounds of footsteps nearing the cabin grew louder. Hale's men were closing in. The footsteps weren't from Hale's usual trained crew. They sounded too rushed, too panicked. They were here to take what they couldn't destroy. William's pulse quickened as the sound of tires crunching on gravel reached him. The cavalry had arrived. There was no time to waste. He had to make sure that everything was secured. This battle, like so many before, was just one step in a larger war. He stuffed the documents into his jacket and moved toward the back window. His mind was a swirl of chaos. Did he risk exposing the truth, or would he protect it? As he peered out, his heart stopped. The familiar hum of helicopters filled the air, and shadows moved on the ground below. A sharp shout rang out from the distance. "Get down! We've got them!" William's breath caught as he saw the figure of Agent Reeves, leading a tactical unit of FBI agents moving toward the cabin, their eyes sharp, their movements controlled. They were here to bring justice, to stop the destruction. Gunshots rang out, but they were quickly suppressed as the agents took control of the situation. William felt the tension in his chest slowly easing as the sound of the battle started to quiet, replaced by the calm, methodical voices of law enforcement securing the area. Within minutes, the sounds of Hale's men retreating echoed through the trees, their resistance crushed by the sudden arrival of the FBI. Nicholas Hale's name had been whispered among the agents, and William knew that the man, his operation, and his empire were about to come crashing down. The fire still raged behind him, but William felt something he hadn't felt in a long time: hope. He had made it through. The land was safe for now. And with Hale's men taken down, justice was finally within reach. But as William stepped outside, his legs shaky from the tension, he couldn't ignore the gnawing emptiness inside him. The loss of his family, the fire that had consumed his past. He had won this battle, but the scars from the past, those would never go away. They would always be with him. As the last of the fire began to be contained and the flames died down, the world seemed quieter, more peaceful. But William knew the fight wasn't over. The fight for truth, for the legacy of Samuel Grant, would continue. Agent Reeves walked up to him, her expression serious but filled with understanding. She gave him a firm handshake. "Justice has been served," she said, her voice steady. "We've got everything we need. Hale's empire is done." William nodded, but his eyes were distant, focusing on the mountains. He wasn't just thinking about Hale or the fight that had just been won. He was thinking about the people who had helped him get here, about Emily and Rose, about the life he had lost. "I didn't do this alone," William replied softly, glancing at Marley, who stood beside him, her gaze unwavering. She had fought by his side. She had been his anchor. Isabella gave him a nod, understanding the weight of his words. "We'll get the truth out there," she said, "and you'll get the peace you deserve." William exhaled deeply. The journey wasn't over. Not yet. The sun was just beginning to rise, casting a golden hue across the charred remnants of the forest. The fire had subsided, leaving behind a landscape forever altered, yet somehow still brimming with life. William stood at the edge of the ridge, his hands resting on the worn wood of the fence he had rebuilt, a symbol of resilience after all the destruction. Behind him, the distant hum of the helicopters faded into silence, the final remnants of the battle now quiet. Hale's empire had crumbled, justice had been served, and the world was starting to understand the truth Samuel Grant had fought so hard to protect. But for William, the fight was over. His mission was complete. He had done what he came to do. Marley stood by his side, her eyes watching the horizon, as if she too understood that their journey had reached its end. She had been more than just a protector. She had been his partner, his constant companion, the one who never gave up, no matter the odds. "I never thought it would end like this," William whispered, his voice carried away by the gentle morning breeze. The weight of the past was still heavy on his chest, but with it came a sense of peace. He was no longer running from his memories, he was facing them head on, and he was ready to move forward. Together, they turned and made their way down the ridge, the path leading them back to the cabin. The land around them, though scarred by the fire, seemed to hold a quiet promise. Small shoots of green were already poking through the blackened earth, a symbol of rebirth, of life continuing despite the devastation. The mountain was healing, just as William was. As they approached the cabin, William paused for a moment, taking in the sight. It wasn't just a building, it was a home, a place where he had found purpose, where he had rediscovered the man he once was. The memories of Emily and Rose still lingered in the walls, but now they felt like a part of the foundation that had helped him rebuild his life. He wasn't just protecting a piece of land anymore, he was protecting their legacy, the love they had shared, and the life they had dreamed of. He knelt down beside Marley, placing his hand gently on her fur. She looked up at him, her gaze filled with quiet understanding. They had both been through so much together, and now, as the day began anew, they had found a sense of peace. "We did it, girl," William murmured, a smile tugging at the corner of his lips. "We kept it safe." Marley's tail gave a gentle thump against the ground, as if to echo his sentiment. She wasn't just his protector. She was his family now. The bond they shared had become unbreakable, forged through battle and loss, strengthened through every trial they had faced. As the sun rose higher in the sky, the cabin stood strong, surrounded by the vast wilderness. The world outside was still, the distant sounds of the forest filling the air. William took a deep breath, inhaling the fresh, crisp mountain air. It was a new day, a new chapter. For the first time in a long while, he felt a sense of hope, a quiet belief that life could still be good, still be worth fighting for. He wasn't sure what the future held, but for the first time he was ready to face it. The scars of the past would always be with him, but they no longer defined him. He had found something worth protecting, something worth living for. And with Marley by his side, he knew he could face anything. In the end, it's clear that the bond between a person and their dog is something truly special. No matter the trials or the struggles, a German shepherd like Marley will always stand by your side. They are not just pets, they are protectors, warriors, and companions, ready to sacrifice everything for the ones they love. Through every battle, through every challenge, Marley's loyalty never wavered. Her courage was unmatched, and her love was a constant source of strength for William. She showed him what it means to be truly loyal, to fight for what matters, and to give everything for those you hold dear. A German shepherd's love is pure and unconditional. They ask for so little but give so much. They teach us the true meaning of loyalty and sacrifice, reminding us that love doesn't always need words. It's in every gesture, every moment of protection, every glance of understanding. As William and Marley stand side by side, they are a living testament to the power of love and loyalty. And as they continue their journey together, they show us all that no matter how dark the world may seem, there's always light in the love we share with those who never leave our side. In this world, the love of a dog is a gift, one that reminds us to be better, kinder, and more devoted. The bond they offer is a treasure, one that endures forever, lighting the way through even the toughest of times.